Takže všetkých vás vítam. Welcome to the Medium Gallery, to the, I think it's already fourth lecture from the series New Interfaces. Today we invited Jelisaveta Rapaić, who is currently a PhD student at the theory department of the Academy of Fine Arts and Design, where she studied beforehand Intermedia, and before she was studying textile in Belgrade. And she will today have a lecture that she prepared exclusively for this lecture series. So thank you, Jelisaveta, that you joined us, and thanks to the Slovak Art Council, which supported this lecture series. So now I will give the word to Jelisaveta, and thanks.
Thank you, Mirka, so much for this lovely introduction. Nobody wants to say a few words about themselves, so thank you for doing that instead of me. Yes, so I'm mainly interested in kind of probing, can it feminism, or how can, or where is this difference between the textile art that somehow is connected to traditional crafts and domesticity versus the art that is very liberating and feminist. So to go on this journey, I would like, this whole lecture will have maybe three parts. One part will be the maybe background or the beginning with modernity, where this distinction between high art or crafts and where does textile belong in this category is kind of placed, and where maybe this creating and gendering of a craft or art started, and the making of the feminine. And then we will go into examining two artists that are creating today, which are both working with textiles in a different way, but we can find some interesting relations. So I would like to start with this clumsy category of crafts within art. It is definitely a clumsy one because, well, it somehow entails that it is less than art, that it is easily replicated, that it is a skill rather than something for which you need to invest certain amount of time and thinking. And maybe the piece or the essay that really sparked this debate and that I often come back to in a lot of my research is The Ornament and Crime by Adolf Loos from the beginning of the 20th century. And if you maybe had a chance already to read this essay, you might know what I'm hinting at, but the basis is that Adolf Loos basically makes the distinction that there is a relation between the ornament, which is primitive and feminine, emotional, and the modernist idea is something rational, progressive, new, and masculine. So he talks in this essay about clean lines, clean shapes. He was an architect, and he talks of a craftsman near his place that creates special shoes from leather that have special engravings, and that he goes to this man and explains to him that the amount of work that is needed to create this ornament is, well, it's, in his idea, it's senseless and stupid and degenerate almost, because it does not belong to the rational man of the 20th century that is about efficiency and creating things fast that are durable. This is a value of the past to embellish something to that level. Then that the man of the 20th century doesn't have space for such vanity objects of nostalgia and regression. Beauty lies in function, clean, practical, logical forms, which is really a lot similar to the kind of architecture he admired as well. So the feminist theorists argue that ornament is not a crime, as Adolf Loos puts it, but actually a record of memory and culture and skill and care, a testimony to non-Western transmission of knowledge, non-oral histories, and that this sentence fed into a larger system of gendered exclusion in art history. So this is maybe an example of what Adolf Loos would have considered to be very clean, masculine, worthy of our time and our eyes and praise. So there's this book, which is very important, from the 80s, called The Subversive Stitch, a play on word on the submissive, when the submissive becomes the subversive, by Rosiska Parker. And it talks about the creating of the feminine or the masculine. And basically that embroidery and crafts in the 17th to 19th century played an important role in shaping what it meant to be a good woman, and that it was a virtue that was assigned to women that can take time to be on their own, be patient with care and details, and that it's something that is for the home and the space. We're making it very homey, and that it's almost biological for women to be in this domestic, not almost, that it is biological for women to be domesticated, creating for the home, creating projects, products or objects that are to be used, to be manned, and that men therefore are for public space, intellectual labor, creativity, and therefore art as conceptual, innovative, public is masculine, and women who are more for repetitive labor, domestic space and private spaces are therefore crafts women, which is manual, decorative, domestic, and feminine. The category basically erases the political and aesthetic complexity of textile art. The division still today influences the level to which female textile artists are being taken seriously. Still to this day, it is very important to know that somehow there was this boom maybe 10 years ago that all of a sudden, let's say, Documenta and biannuals started recognizing or having this big recognition for textile arts, and textile arts being very present. But it is, again, a question of, is it kind of a quota thing, or is it a trend maybe in what institutions are seeing? Is it simply because this is a nice way to represent a large group of people? Because almost all the time, the textile art that we see in these big shows is of women, queer, and indigenous artists. And it's more easily transportable than other works. But what Rosiska did within this book is that she puts an emphasis that the stitch and the new textile art of the second half of 20th century is therefore subversive and not submissive, that it employs and works for a care, and that it is considering different maybe histories and futures and the different positions of women that are creating it. But that again doesn't fully answer our questions, is every textile art feminist or not, and how do we reach this point of deciding? One of the artists, here I'm using an example of Nava Lubelski, Clumsy. She works with this idea of a mistake or a domestic failure. So she's actually embroidering the stains on a cloth after a party. And this work I also chose to represent, to picture here, because it has similar sentiment to the works that we will talk about later. So yes, there was this institutional exclusion of textile art practices, and it's historically been excluded from high art status, and also because it was majority of time it was done by women. It wasn't so much so in, let's say, Eastern Europe in the 20th century. Eastern Europe and Central Europe was actually quite avant-garde with textile art, so that's something that we can be proud of. But even when this movement started, it was not inherently what was considered craft, but it was made to seem so by the political efforts. What I'm trying to say is that there were some amazing artists, let's say like Jagoda Bujic or Magdalena Bakamovic, that would take textile forms and basically put them into sculpture and in spaces that embody a different kind of, have a different kind of embodiment than they usually would. But then when, let's say, a state like Yugoslavia or Czechoslovakia would be hiring artists to design some of the spaces of their national, let's say, assembly, and they would work on carpets, they would also mostly invite male artists to just create designs and have somebody in the shop create tapestries based on their designs of painters or sculptors, and not necessarily invite textile artists to create sculptures for their space or installations. But what is very important for me to note here, that because of this, also there's this lexicon of whether it's studio craft or whether it is art, or where does this division stand. It was very important at one point where artists, especially women and textile artists, started using the word craft in an empowering way and creating something which is like craftivism, which we can see a lot in nowadays protests, especially in the US, but everywhere else, where we see textiles occupying public space and in the form of some resistance. Today's lecture, though, will also be on different types of threats and pathologies, which I like to call the global art and dangerous women. So the idea that there is global art is kind of recent, meaning that there is this Western art, which is from the Northern and Western hemisphere, and then it was everything else, and so everything else is global art, it's not Western art. But what an artist from non-Western places needs to do to become recognized is essentially to exhibit away from their home country or home city and be recognized in the Western places. And once the West has recognized an artist from the global South or East, then they're a global artist. Before that, I don't think, maybe they don't exist in the Western lexicon. And in this chapter we will talk about what does this actually mean in terms, basically through a post-colonial lens, and we'll talk about dangers of dangerous women, like women of color, trans women, sex workers, disabled women, abortionists, bad, dangerous mothers, daughters, botched bodies, and bad wives. And we'll talk about the works of Teresa Margolis and Felicia Wood. So Teresa is, she was a part of a collective, and she's from Mexico, and she, Sebefro, and she didn't study art at the beginning. She was actually a morgue practitioner, so she worked in morgues and did autopsies on bodies, and really just started doing art later on as a necessity in life. With her work we will talk about a lot of violence, narco cartels related deaths, stitches, barbed wire, blood, bodily fluids are the materials that she's working with. Here I have a few quotes that are related. So one of them is from Sayak Valencia about gore capitalism, which is that violence itself has become a product within the hyper-consumerist neoliberal capitalism, and that tortured and mutilated bodies have become commodities to be treated and utilized for profit in an age of impunity and governmental austerity. In this specific example, we're talking about the narco cartels on the Mexican and US border, and a lot of deaths that just come about it from people that get involved or are just casualties, but that somehow even these deaths are profitable to some degree. What Julia Skelly talks about in her book Skin Crafts is that that demonstrates how women, particularly women of color, sex workers, have been rendered monstrous through discourse, including visual culture, and as one strategy of gore capitalism, into which hunting is to turn women into monsters so that they are perceived as threats that must be obliterated. And also Nina Jablonski has this nice quote where she is comparing skin, canvas, and textile, and that the skin is a layer and a boundary, semi-penetratable, similar to clothes. And it has taken a new role of a social canvas, embodied metaphor for our recent evolutionary past. Well, at the end of the day, once we pass, our skin does reflect our age, ancestry, maybe the skin color, some of our habits, which is state of health, and cultural identity. So this is a piece from 2006 called 127 Corpses, Cuerpos, and it's actually made from 127 stitches that were pulled out of post-mortem bodies from Mexican morgues of all the people that were killed in narco cartel violence in Mexico. So this work is, and what I like to think a lot about, if we see also a different work of Teresa, is that we don't really see much of bodies in her works, but her works are very much body related. But maybe the very important thing is that there is an absence of body, but a lot of DNA. So these are real stitches with real blood, some bodily fluids that also leak from wounds, which are a result after the abduction is done and the bodies are sewn back up, and it resulted in a 35-meter long thread. Teresa also has represented Mexico at the 53rd Venice Biennale, which I believe was like around 2010. It was a few rooms, and one of which was empty, but there was a very strong smell to it. And basically what happened here was that the families of the victims of narco cartel violence were hired to every day clean the rooms with a mixture of blood and water. And 6 months since the opening of the Venice Biennial, the room reeked, and this absence of, yes, there is no body here, actually, nor corpse, but it really left a mark and a stench that somebody was there. This was also part of Venice Biennial, and after a also narco cartel kind of killing near the border, what she would usually do, and does a lot in her works, is that she takes textiles and goes to these places that are testaments to life and death, but mainly death, and she picks up blood, maybe sweat, water, dirt, anything that is actually post-mortem and that is kind of traceable, almost like an imprint on a fabric. So these fabrics were also hung, and the actual people that were hired were the families of the victims here. This is also one work of Teresa's, which I find very interesting. It's called Women Embroidering Next to Lake Atitlan. And it's actually made by a handful of, the embroidery itself, by a handful of indigenous women from Guatemala rural areas. And the actual kind of rocha butterfly is made of impressions of a body of a femicide victim by her husband in Guatemala City. Most femicide victims in the world maybe are from, but especially in Latin America and in Guatemala, are from indigenous descent, and most femicides actually happen from somebody that is known to the victim. This work particularly is very interested to be reading and examining, because I wouldn't dare do it. Maybe my teachings are only limited to Western iconography interpretations, and here I believe it would be very important to take into consideration what kind of meaning different symbolism might have in indigenous iconography and symbolism. Now we're going to switch up to a bit lighter example of an artist, which is Qualisha Wood. By the way, just to finish up, what maybe I would like to say, because yes, her work is very gory, but what she wants to present with her work and what she says is that to honor the lives of the victims and to make maybe everybody more aware of what's happening, which we don't like to encounter so much, but something to consider definitely, and how our skins leave marks, that our bodies are not only with us when we live, but also something that has certain traces once we pass or are killed, as most of these people are, and to maybe point to the gore capitalism that is happening in certain places of the world. Qualisha Wood is an artist also that is working, unlike Teresa, who works also in different medium but uses textile a lot. Qualisha Wood is really a more textile artist in a classical sense of that word. She's born into internet. She's born in 1996, and she works a lot with glitches, viruses, women bodies that seem to be viruses to the system, porn, black femme identities, girlhood, ebony terminology, sex work. So there is this quote by Legacy Russell in Glitch Feminism, which is basically talking, I don't know if you had a chance to read the book or not, but a lot of it is focused on if there is any distinction between us in real life and us online. Are these two personalities kind of different? Is the online space a space where we can be somebody else? Or are we going there to be ourselves? Are the two kind of emerged? And I had a chance to talk to Qualisha actually about this topic for a recent interview we did, and she is somebody who has really grown up on the internet, told me that she never wanted to go on internet and be herself, and it is because of internet that she maybe first started questioning her own sexuality, because she chose an avatar that was male or that performed in a different way. So she works a lot with internet vocabulary and also what it means to be a black woman on the internet. So what Legacy Russell says is to embody error is to celebrate the breaking of a broken culture via our own presence, is a radical act to tear it all down. Sofia Giovannitti, a artist, sex worker, and a writer, talks about in her book Working Girl that art and sex occupy similar positions under capitalism. The commodification of each, while rampant, is also a rifle with anxiety and subject to question of ethics, purity, and meaning. This is because we are told that sex skyfall is to be commodified. Both are seemingly sacred forms of human expression, and we are taught to keep them close to ourselves, safe from capital vultures' vicarious appetite. But essentially what Sophia says in her book, that we are, in order to sell art, we have to prostitute our art as well. And I have a few quotes from Qualisha that are maybe related to some of the work that we'll be analyzing. And one of her main, maybe, starting points was that if I'm going to be fetishized anyway as a young black woman on the internet, I'd rather just do it myself and control the narrative. So one of her first tapestries that she ever did was only in 2019, and it's called Cult Following. So it essentially, she was maybe triggered by the idea that on the internet there are a lot of trolls and communities which she's a part of, but essentially how on the internet, not in real life, people can get away with saying all the slurs, racist comments that one wouldn't tell her in real life, and those comments might leave a mark or even spark more hate speech, but just then you go on your day and you don't even notice what else is, how it might affect someone. She says that as a young black girl, I was always warned about hypersexuality and told not to be seen as a sexual object, to be careful with how I present myself around men. Seeing porn in college and people existing under this ebony category felt like it was reaffirming everything I had heard my whole life. It became really important to reclaim that word and take the power back. So this is one of her works, The Black Madonna Horror Complex, which is acquired actually by the Met. And within this work, she's also playing a lot with Christianity, religion, religious symbolism, and some of the internet online language, window pop-ups, glitches, let's say, windows, background, almost the colors that she used are also very vivid, almost Microsoft Paint-like. And Young Hot Ebony is online, which is what is written in these pop-up windows. And she's presenting herself as a Madonna, a deity, somebody sacred up on a pedestal, but also just on the internet, and reclaiming these slurs or categories that exist. One of her more recent exhibitions, which is Malware, is about viruses and glitches and maybe black female bodies existing as essentially glitches in the system, or present, or very big, very proud female young bodies existing in public space, being glitches in the society. So we here have the word camisado, which is a tactic when you scare somebody in the middle of the night. And what Qualisha is really enjoying in tapestries is that they can kind of hide a lot, meaning that here she can have little info or meaning semi-visible, whereas when she works with a tafting or a different technique, everything is more exposed. So, why I think these two artists, Teresa and Policia, both have the element of body very present. Just one of them, in Teresa's case, it's a lot bodies, it's other people's bodies, and it's absence of them, and that these bodies are forever lost, and it's a imprint. It's almost like printmaking. Whereas in Policia's sense, she is taking that it is very difficult and full of responsibility who she choose to represent, and that she maybe only has control of herself, but not so much of her self-image that is out there, and that she would rather take this control of her self-image and self-represent in the world and make herself way bigger maybe than necessary. She works a lot with selfies, so she doesn't hide if she has blemishes or if at some point she's gained weight or lost weight. But she is choosing her own image to be out there. The hidden or exposing properties of textiles is also what I wanted to mention in this sense, because textile as a tapestry, usually the way it's done, the way Policia works is a digital jacquard, which means that it is designed in a program. You pick the kind of stitches, so a lot you can essentially blur or make to be semi-visible, hidden through which is also an important thing, that she works with a digital jacquard, as she is very much in the digital realm and uses this digital aesthetic. And in her case, she can implant, she can manipulate the image, the elements, take screenshots and build almost a collage of a story. Whereas in Teresa's work, so much is hidden and so much is exposed that we don't even know. It's really just imprints of bodies and histories of people whose maybe stories we will never get to hear because, well, their lives are not deemed as important, and because the states don't, they benefit from such killings and harm. Can feminism? I think both of these artists can very much make it feminism, but I can maybe open up this question to the rest of the audience, or allow you maybe to ask some questions, and just, there's not a lot of us here, so maybe we can just have a conversation about these works or something else. Anybody? Is anybody here a textile artist? Yeah?
Like textile design.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to ask you about the tapestry, because I was wondering if it's in a correlation with the broader audience, only if it's only just for the high art, presented as a high art, or is it also presented on the level of public visibility? If it's somewhere, I can imagine it can be shown as a nice catchphrase also on the internet, but if it's also in a public space, because
her particular or general?
yes, her particular, because I'm quite baffled. It's very, very nice in a way that I really admire tapestries as I continually try to depict tapestries in one space all the time here in Primate's Palace in Bratislava, and I kind of get really deep into that all around world. But if it's just hermetically like concealed as an art for her, as an artist, if you talk to her, or if it's like more of she also narrates it through a like wide lens of like for public in general. Like what is her aim? Do you know in a like brief her target audience or something?
Well, few questions, but yes, I'll answer all of them. Can her art be accessed in public spaces? Not necessarily exposed to the elements, but one of the, I forgot which one, but one of the USA airports also acquired it as just a public purchase of an artwork. So it will be in a non-institution gallery kind of space there. A lot of her works is in private collections though, or in museum collections, but she is working in the US, so I'm not sure here where, but what I do know is that actually like 2 days ago, she opened up, I'm not sure if it was just an exhibition or she had a performance in Victoria and Albert Museum in London. So she's somebody that is very active to this day. But what is her aim and audience? When she started working, she originally maybe wanted to make art for, she was aware in an art college that there is, especially in the US, that there is this kind of huge class difference, and that it is not like privileged, you have to be privileged to go to an art school, especially in the US, but also everywhere in the world, to be honest. And she, at the beginning, what started all of her works was actually this student work called, I think, a selfie book. But it was a project where she would every day post her selfies on Instagram for a whole year, different, but she also was studying photography at the time. So kind of playing with the image of her own self, but the idea is that if this is art, then it should be accessible to everyone, therefore it is on Instagram, so that her friends from outside of fancy art school in New York can also see it and access it. I don't know if I answered all of your questions. Was there another one?
Yes, I think I got the gist. Maybe it was just like a detour for the...
But there is one also interesting thing, and the thing is that when I talked to her, because we did this interview for the next edition of Flash Art, and that is that what she sometimes does is because she has a studio, she's selling, she's now she's living in Philadelphia, but what she usually does is that if people come to her studio, she first makes them, especially if it's, because most of her works is actually bought by men collectors, male collectors, so she really puts some of them like kiss my big black ass as one of the first images for them to see and maybe to go through, and it's a little bit of a play on how they take it with all of this also internet lexicon. Yes.
Okay, so she's kind of in a forefront in the like the first from the feminist point of view. She's like she's standing also for the ideas which she presents, but also she's like confronting the art market or art in general as the commodity which she makes, because the outcome, I see that if she's working with digital art, she can produce on some kind of quality standard, and it's can be admired like very nicely, like from the aesthetic point of view. So. But compared to the Teresa, if I remember correctly, she's more in a. She also really like digs from the Christian well of iconography, like for instance this one. But it's very interesting to take it to the national level and to also the obscure like murky waters of murders and women. That was my question. Are there women which she concentrates, like the dead bodies, or like for instance, is it like specifically women, or is it like just the narcotics territory.
I would say that she's mainly interested in the kind of death that shouldn't have happened, or that is a product of malfunctioning systems that people are living in, which kind of comes down to femicide and narco-cartel violence on the US-Mexico border. So both the Venice Biennial Pavilion and 127 corpses are from the deaths of narco-cartel violence, but then this one is a femicide victim, and this was actually, her body of the victim was imprinted on the textile and then later on embroidered by indigenous women from the community. So not only women, kind of everyone, because everyone gets killed in these murky waters of death, the state being involved with cartels and kind of financing from it too. I would then once again thank you all for showing up today, and maybe I know there were other two big events, so thank you for choosing this lecture. I hope you enjoyed it, and maybe you can ask later on when the cameras are off as well. Thank you.